The subject of almost everything that we see on screens or in real life is people, so we're pretty conditioned to be able to tell if something is wrong with skin tones. Whether it's too warm, too cool, too magenta, or too green, nailing your skin tones is hands down the most important part of the color correction process. So let's take a look at my 3 steps to perfect dialed skin tones in all of your videos. So step 1 starts before you ever hit Premiere or DaVinci or whatever editing software you use, and that is nailing exposure, white balance, and lighting before anything else happens. Now, if you mess these up, there absolutely are ways to salvage your footage, but if you get them right, it'll make your life a whole lot easier in post. If you're going for a clean and flattering look, then you want a large soft light source, and you want your in-camera white balance to match that of your light. For example, this light is set to daylight or 5600 Kelvin, so my in-camera white balance on the Pocket 6K is also 5600 Kelvin. Secondly, make sure you're exposing properly. There are 3 main tools to using this on cameras, and that is zebras, histograms, and false color. If you're using false color, make sure your skin tone sits somewhere in the light gray area. If you're using a histogram, try to get most of your data to sit somewhere in the middle of the graph. You don't want a bunch too far up on the left or too far up on the right. And if you're using zebras, try to get your image as bright as it possibly can be without having zebras on the crucial parts of your image. For example, right now I'm using zebras, and the light here in the back and the logo on my screen have zebras, meaning that they're blown out, but these aren't really crucial to the shot. So now that you have solid video to work with, the second step comes down to bringing that footage into post. In this case, we're going to be using Premiere Pro, and we're going to correct the saturation, contrast, our black and white levels before we get to our skin tones. All right, so we have this clip from our first shot earlier, and what I have pulled up are called the lumetri scopes, and then over here, our lumetri color panel. If you don't see these things, you can click on the color tab in the top of Premiere, or you can go over here to the window button, and about 2/3 of the way down is lumetri color and lumetri scopes. So why do we use lumetri scopes? Well, your monitor isn't always going to be entirely accurate to how your video is going to be exported and viewed on other devices. So what we like to do is pull up our scopes here, which gives us exact data points to use to correct our footage. That way we know where our skin tones are, where our exposure's at, without having to rely on monitor calibration or other things like that. So the 2 we're going to focus on is vector scopes, YUV, and waveform RGB. The vector scope YUV is this one here on the left, the circle, and basically what it does is it shows your data as in your image here in the center, and it shows what color the entire image is pushing towards. So if a piece of data was to come here and hit the red square and push beyond that, it would be entirely oversaturated and clipping. Additionally, there are 2 lines that intersect here on this circle. The one we're going to pay attention to is the one that goes here from top left to bottom right, and that is our skin tone line. Through color science and research that is like far beyond me, we know that this skin tone line is the best way to make sure that our skin tones are most accurate to what we see in real life. And most skin tones, regardless of skin color or ethnicity, are going to fall somewhere on this line. So we're going to go ahead and add some contrast to our image, add saturation, pull down the shadows, bump the highlights, basic level color correction things. That way we have a good base to work from for our skin tones. So now we have a really good base image to work from, and this is where the fun part of the actual skin tones begins. So lumetri color on Premiere isn't the most intuitive color correcting platform out there. It's fine for most things. People usually tend to stick to this basic correction and this curves tab, but there's so much more you can do to get the full power out of lumetri. So we're going to go into the HSL secondary tab, and this is where we can qualify our skin. So we're going to click on this eyedropper tool here, bring it to our skin, and give it a click. So we want to see what we actually selected. We'll check this box next to the color/gray tab, and boom, that is what our key just selected. Not quite enough, so what we can do is click on the plus value here. There's one right next to the main eyedropper that has a plus, and we can just start to drag this around my face. All right, we got a little bit too much in there, so we're gonna click on the -1. Firstly, get out some of this blue and get out the purple. So it's looking better. Ways to move around the key here are on the H, S, and L, which is hue, meaning what color, the saturation, meaning how saturated that color is, and then luminance, which is the brightness of that pixel or that color. So we can move around all these sliders to select different parts of our image. And after I've done my main key, I like to go around in here and just move stuff around until I find a sweet spot. It doesn't have to be perfect. You don't have to get just your skin. Sometimes other things in your image will benefit from this skin correcting process anyway. All right, so in general, that's looking pretty good. The right side of my face is kind of blue because of the light here, but that is a-okay. I'm pretty happy with that key. The last step to that is going to be going into the denoise here. We're going to denoise it just a tiny bit and then blur it just a little bit. And that cleans up our key pretty well. So now I'll go back to our elementary scopes, and we can see that most of our data is shifted just a little bit to the right of our skin tone line. This is pretty common in Caucasian skin. We often show up a bit more red on camera. So there, again, are a few ways to correct this. The most straightforward way to do it is to change your temperature and tint. And we can see, to get it closer to that line, we might warm up the image a little bit, and we might make it a little bit more green. Again, this is very, very small adjustments. Bring it down even a bit more. If we check on what that looks like, that's a pretty decent adjustment right away. We're going from a more pinkish, weird red, pale kind of skin tone for something that looks like it has a bit more blood flow going on. Another way and a more detailed way to do that is to change your correction to the 3-way color corrector here, and we can mess around with all 3 of these settings. So number 1, your highlights, I like to replicate what the light source is. So in this case, it is a daylight 5600 Kelvin light source. So we're going to add a little bit of blue to our highlights. Get very, very small adjustments. Midtones are going to correct in the direction that we need to. So we're going to push it. And then shadows, I always like to add a bit more of the deeper red into the key just to give it some blood flow going on. And then after we do these 3 corrections, we can go back into our temperature and tint and adjust accordingly. A lot of this is about your eye, but the skin tone line and the scopes give you a pretty good frame of reference. Maybe add a little bit of contrast to the skin here to help it stand out a bit more. And usually when you add contrast, that adds saturation. You can see when I do that, our data on the vector scope YUV starts to get a bit closer to the outside coloring here. So anything beyond that is totally oversaturated. So we can add just a little bit of contrast and then maybe bring back the saturation just a tiny bit. And then bring off a little bit of sharpening to make the skin look a little bit smoother, more baby's bottom-like. And then we can go back and undo our color gray. And then there's a skin tone correction. If we filter that on and off, there is off, pretty pink and pale looking now that we look at it entirely off. And if we turn it back on, we have some life kind of revitalized and something that's a bit more natural to the eye and the skin. Then we can go back and make any other adjustments that we want to. In this case, I might want to drop the shadows a little bit more, or add a bit more global saturation. I usually like my talking head points at my desk to be pretty poppy and bright. And I think that's a pretty decent final image here. So now we can, beautiful face for me to pause on, right? Now we can turn our corrections on and off to see the before and after. We go from the super flat image into our basic corrections and then into our skin tone corrections. It's not something you notice really until you fix it, and then once you start doing this, you'll notice skin tones that are out of whack in all sorts of videos. So hopefully this helped in understanding how to perfect your skin tones, and a huge thank you to everyone who's been watching and supporting my content as of late. It means the absolute world to me. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out to me on social media or drop them in the comments here below. Once you get your skin tones perfected and your image correct as it is here, then you have the room to have a bunch of fun with color grading, introducing a stylistic, emotional element into your images. Bye-bye.